First and foremost, I think it's important that if you want to get into brokerage, that you find a market that really resonates with your personality and where you actually relate to and enjoy the properties you're selling, because that's walking the walk, right? If you don't love Cleveland, it's going to be harder for you to sell the properties in Cleveland because you're not speaking from your heart about the homes and them being a good investment or what you need for a good lifestyle. So I think it's important that you're congruent to it. Every market has a different qualification of luxury real estate, and in our case, we just do it by price point, and I think that's the best way to go about it. In our case, we classify luxury as 5 million to 8 million and then above 8 million we call it ultra luxury.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Bigger Life Podcast, where we talk to entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders building a bigger life through bold actions and real results. I'm your host, Ray Bensel. Today, we have awesome guest, Sam. Sam has sold $25 million of real estate in his first 2 years working with Berkshire Hathaway and is now a co-owner of Brokers of Jacksonville Hole Real Estate Agency, known for his expertise in luxury properties and digital marketing. Hey, Sam, how are you doing today?
Good, Ray. Glad to be with you on Christmas week here.
So, Sam, how did you get into real estate?
I believe it or not, I got my start in real estate through my fraternity house at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I was leasing the bedrooms in the fraternity house and chasing guys down for rent payments, fixing things at the house. That turned into leasing apartments and Section 8 housing locally in Madison. And then when I moved out to Jackson Hole, luxury property management, and now luxury brokerage at Berkshire Hathaway. So it was really a natural progression, kind of stair stepping up into nicer properties and higher net worth people.
So, most of the brokers that I know, they don't make into luxury brokerage. And you are quite young and you started with luxury. So, how did that happen? And, it's kind of tough to kind of penetrate into that market because you're talking to high net worth individuals, you are dealing with high value properties. And why should they trust you when there are people who are working into the industry for the last 20 years, 50 years, right?
First and foremost, I think it's important that if you want to get into brokerage, that you find a market that really resonates with your personality and where you actually relate to and enjoy the properties you're selling, because that's walking the walk, right? If you don't love Cleveland, it's going to be harder for you to sell the properties in Cleveland because you're not speaking from your heart about the homes and them being a good investment or what you need for a good lifestyle. So I think it's important that you're congruent to it, and that just so happens that Jackson Hole is really congruent to my personality. I love the sense of American, Western Americana, freedom, individualism, libertarianism out there. And the properties themselves are very beautiful in my style of architecture, as well as a very strong historical run of cash flow and appreciation. So it's very easy for me to walk the walk. I have one investment property myself in the area, and I've lived there now for 6.5 years. So I think the trust is built very clearly with higher net worth people because I come across as authentic. I'm investing just as they are. And I also come from silver spoon background a little bit because I went to boarding school in Connecticut and I went to high school with some of these higher net worth people that come from old money. So I know their language and that helps a lot.
Awesome. So you mentioned you're investing alongside with them. So how are you investing? What kind of investments have you made?
Yeah, so in 2020, as we know, the real estate market nationally started really ramping up. And I thought to myself, well, I better get in now. I was only 22, 23 years old, and I had enough money for a down payment for a condo outside of Jackson Hole by 30 minutes. And so I bought that. I turned it into a house hack, rented out my other room. Rents continued to increase, values and started to increase as well. And now we're 5 years later here. The property has doubled in value and also has doubled in rents. And so I have like $250,000 of equity in the condo, and I now cash flow around $600 or $700 a month. Whereas the time of purchase, it was only worth $255,000, and it was going to lose money on a cash flow basis every month. But because of that big COVID market boom, it's turned into like the biggest win ever. So now I have a great option of, hey, do I refinance it? Do I sell it? How do I multiply my return on equity? But as of right now, I just have this one investment property, and I'm hesitant to sell it because of my 2.75% interest rate. And it's a very nice cash flowing property. But I'm thinking now about, hey, what's my next step going to be? I live in a really amazing situation where I don't pay any rent or any utilities because I actually live in one of my clients' guest homes. outside Jackson. And it saves me about $25,000 a year. And I can put that money towards my fund in buying my next property. But things are just so expensive. It's been a lot slower to invest in properties than I would like to. So I'm even thinking about getting something out of state right now.
So you are a co-owner of your brokerage, right? So how's that feeling? You are a leader, you are a mentor, you are doing, more than selling the real estate. You own this company. How's that side of the world?
Yeah, this is a new development. I just became a co-owner in my brokerage this year. I'm on year 5 of doing brokerage full time. And it's just kind of like an honor and also an incentive to join the company and stick with the company because I'm one of 5 owners now. And so if your typical agent broker relationship is, all the agents are working under the broker out there producing, buying and selling and paying a good cut to the brokerage. And we have a pretty equitable split. It's just for overhead and things like that. But inevitably, there are profits at the end of every year. So now I have the incentive to mentor younger agents than me, newer agents, get them to produce, and then profit sharing among the 5 owners at the end of the year, if and when there are profits to go around. And there is some risk to being an owner too. If we have a terrible year, I'll be writing a check to the company, but that's part of having equity in your business and the risk that business owners take on. But it's just a really cool thing to say I'm a co-owner of a Berkshire Hathaway brokerage, especially in a place that's luxury and prestigious like Jackson Hole. And I'm excited to grow it and recruit new agents and make it something really special.
Luxury real estate is different, right? So, what are the nuances of luxury real estate? Let's take it from a property standpoint. When you say luxury, what's the cutoff? When is it a regular property, and how do you classify it as a luxury property?
Yeah, every market has a different qualification of luxury real estate, and in our case, we just do it by price point, and I think that's the best way to go about it. In our case, we classify luxury as 5 million to 8 million, and then above 8 million, we call it ultra luxury. And I think there are some markets that don't have an ultra luxury classification at all, but we kind of have to by how much our valuations have increased, especially since COVID. The average home price is around $7 million in Jackson Hole. So that's almost into the ultra luxury to begin with. And you're very rarely going to see a sale for anything single family under 1 million. I think in 2025, there's only been one sale of a single family home under $1 million. And that was like a 2-bedroom, 1 bath, less than 1,000 square foot cabin. That was a fixer upper on a postage stamp of a lot. So we're mostly operating with in that kind of nice to have, but not need class of real estate because it's second homes, it's short-term rental properties. We don't work with a ton of people who live locally. And if we do, we're often selling them homes in Victor, Idaho or Star Valley, Wyoming. And these are markets outside of Jackson. It's tough to find people that really live in Jackson with their primary residence anymore. And if they do own it, they're just holding on to it.
$7 million for average home sale price. I mean, that's ultra luxury for a lot of locations, and that's your average selling price. Awesome. So,
Yeah.
good to know. Now, what's the draw? What's the pull for Jackson Hole?
Yeah, Jackson, it depends on how you look at it because there are so many benefits to the area. But first and foremost, it's just the natural beauty. It is the Grand Teton National Park, the Teton Mountain Range, which is part of the larger Rocky Mountain mountain range. And there are trails and lakes, and it's just pristine, untouched wilderness, as well as Yellowstone National Park. So you have wildlife and you have the recreation that are within those parks, as well as our national forest. And so all of this public land, whether it's federal, it's Bureau of Land Management type of public land, it creates this market where there's not much private land to be developed. And by nature of that, we get really imbalanced supply and demand. And so valuations go up so much because of the pure scarcity of private land and homes in general. So with that, the background of Jackson is also influenced largely by John D. Rockefeller, who put together a collection of these ranches and donated all of the ranches to create Grand Teton National Park. That being said, he saw the vision of the place as kind of a refuge, but it has turned into a wealth preservation vehicle as well for a lot of people. And so we don't have any state income taxes in Wyoming. We don't have any corporate income tax in Wyoming. There's very favorable trust structures and things of that nature to just give you an amazing tax haven and save you a bunch of money. So if someone could say, I'll save a bunch of money on income tax, I'll save money on corporate tax, and I'll be able to have an amazing ski home or summer recreation home with my family, I'm willing to pay a much higher valuation
for
my property than I would anywhere else in the United States.
Now, from the investor standpoint, so the people who are buying these properties for $7 million, $8 million, right? Are they making their money back in virtue of short-term rentals? Have you seen that side of the equation? How is it cash flowing?
Yes, we're largely an appreciation market. And so a lot of cash flow oriented investors don't see the ROI that they would somewhere else if they're investing for cash flow. But what we see a lot of is basically investors feeling as though they overpaid in the first 1 to 3 to 5 years. And then after 5 years, people are saying, wow, the smartest thing you ever did was buying Jackson Hole. And that's because of that appreciation that we typically have seen. If you give it a long enough time, it's panned out pretty well in all cases. Even in 2008, when the rest of the country was tanking, Vegas, down 50, 60, 70%. Jackson Hole dipped 10 to 15% and then recovered within a year and a half. So it's just a very insulated market because of how much pent up demand we have. So people might think about it more of like if you're like a finance guy, you might think of it as buying a bond versus buying a volatile stock. It's much more slow and steady and close to guaranteed appreciation. Definitely not guaranteed, but over a long enough higher time horizon, you'll be sitting pretty. But investors are kind of disappointed with the cash flow returns that they can get.
Okay, great. So as an agent, how is luxury market different? So how do you treat these properties, or how do you have to come up with a different?
Yeah, there's a lot of competition in the brokerage market in Jackson. So in order to get clients, you really have to come up with some sort of cutting edge to make yourself different. And for us, it's digital marketing. It's social media primarily, because not only can we create tens of millions of views on someone's property, but then we can track the engagement and see how people are interacting with them. And we don't pay any money to do this digital marketing. It's all organic advertising. So we can prove that we're actually good at it instead of just pumping dollars into it and saying, hey, look at all these results that we got for you. These are real, natural, organic results. And we've just been able to produce higher quality content and get more visibility than any other brokerage in our area. So it basically just sells itself when it comes to, hey, we can guarantee we can get more eyes on your property than anyone else. And that's kind of the name of the game. There'll be someone in that large group that will like the property.
So let's shift gears, let's talk about lessons from the field. So what have you seen in terms of when you're selling the property? What is from when you're listing these properties out, what kind of things kind of outshine or make those within that class of luxury properties? What are those things that stand them out?
Yeah, good question. Because we can do as much as we can as a brokerage to get visibility on the property. But if the property itself isn't very extraordinary, we take an angle of, hey, you're not just buying the property for what it is itself, you're buying the property for the lifestyle you get by living in Jackson Hole. So if we have a cookie cutter home that seems to the average person too expensive because it'll be like $2.5 million. And if you picked it up and you put it in Cleveland or Cincinnati, it would be like a $300,000 house. So you have to say, okay, when you buy this home, you have this proximity to the ski resort, you have this proximity to the national park, you have the $1 million cowboy bar downtown, you have friends that are going to want to come visit you, you have no state income tax, all the other tax advantages. And so it's kind of a package deal when it comes to selling luxury real estate that at face value is too expensive for what it is, but location, right? It's the old real estate adage. It's so much more about just the home and the structural value itself. So
what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen when people are trying to prep their properties for a sale? They invest some money and time into those properties, but it does not produce the return that they're expecting. And on the flip side of it, what are the other things that they really miss on, which should be easier to do and cost effective to do, and it produces biggest bang on the buck?
I would say in our market, we typically do less prepping for a sale than other places where there's a lot more competition, because we have so much demand. There's always people that want these properties. And so you can just decrease the price enough to get a buyer. A buyer doesn't necessarily need to be wooed with staging and renovations and new paint and, everything perfectly clean. I mean, of course we want a clean house and things like that, but a lot of times people see a property online and even make an offer sight unseen. We saw a lot of that during COVID, just because there is so little supply and so much demand. It's almost a competition still on who's going to get the properties as long as they're appropriately priced. People still run the numbers and everything like that, but we don't suggest that sellers do a ton of investment in staging and and other renovations because you typically just don't see the ROI on it that you would in a more competitive market.
What would be a book or a resource that changed your mindset?
I would go back to the foundational reads. Like when I was getting into the Bigger Pockets community and starting in real estate, my big three were How to Win Friends and Influence People, Think and Grow Rich, and Rich Dad Poor Dad. And if I ever feel lost in my career or just in my financial life, I'll go back and read Rich Dad Poor Dad. If I'm having trouble with my mindset, I will go back and read Think and Grow Rich and just pick out a chapter or read the whole thing again because it's so, those are all so important to getting yourself on the right track and remembering where you came from. All these other books that I've read go into niche concepts and different avenues, but those are just the core three that I'll always remember.
Absolutely. I think sometimes you need to go back and revisit the foundational books to kind of revisit your own sense of things because it's easy to get lost with all this noise and it kind of gives you that direction back. And personally, also, I love that book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. It just, it does not, it opens up the mind shift. Then you're asking the question, how shall I do it? Now I know what I want to do, but how shall I do it? And once you start seeking, you'll find the answer.
I totally agree. It's a mindset book as much as it is a personal finance book. It just shifts your thinking on everything. And I read it again or reference it because it gives me the excitement back from when I first started my career. And that's a lot of what being resilient is about, is like enjoying what you're doing and getting excited about it. So I think that that's kind of the best use of your time, is to go back to something that sparks your fire again.
What does the words bigger life mean to you?
We just got done with our company retreat up at a snowmobile lodge that our team sold last year. It's called Lava Mountain Lodge. We got into this big retreat mindset. We changed our environment. We got snowed in a blizzard, and we were staying at this lodge and eating dinner together every meal. And we talked about our business, and we talked about, hey, what are your goals in life? What are your goals for our business and your personal life, your intimate relationship life, all this other stuff. And to me, the bigger life idea is just living up to your fullest potential. We ran through that. What is your biggest fear? And I think mine was not living my life to its fullest potential. And so more isn't always better, but as long as your personal potential is being fulfilled, that means you're on the right track. And maybe you also will never get there, but at least you know you're on the right track and you're putting your best foot forward every single day. So I think inevitably, if you're congruent with your path and you're chasing your highest potential, you will achieve a bigger life.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for joining today's podcast. Your advice and your journey and your insights about Jackson Hole market has been incredible.
Thanks for having me on, Ray. This was fun. It's great to get to know you and tell you a little bit about what I do and where I live.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And to our viewers, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Bigger Life Podcast. See you then. Thank you.